courtroom was supposed to be a place of justice, a sacred ground where truth spoke louder than power. But on that day, when a trembling victim stood before the bench, her voice cracking as she begged for protection, the judge laughed. It wasn't the nervous chuckle of someone caught off guard. No, this was a cold, dismissive laugh, echoing through the chamber like a death sentence. And what came next would shake the very foundations of the justice system, leaving everyone asking, how deep does corruption really go? In a small Midwestern town, 2016, a young woman named Emily Carter, only 23 years old, was living a quiet life. She worked part-time at a diner, studied accounting at night, and dreamed of moving to the city. But her life changed the moment she crossed paths with David Langford, a local businessman known for his flashy cars, expensive suits, and powerful connections. To most, he was untouchable. Behind closed doors, he was something else entirely. Emily first encountered him at the diner, where he showered her with attention and promises of opportunity. Within weeks, his charm gave way to something darker. Stalking her at school, showing up outside her home at night, sending threatening texts that grew more aggressive with every rejection. Neighbors recalled hearing heated arguments outside her apartment. One elderly witness told police, her voice was shaking. She kept saying, "Leave me alone, please, just leave me alone." And then I heard him laugh. The threats escalated into violence. One night, Emily was found beaten outside her building, blood dripping onto the concrete, her eyes swollen shut. She whispered only 2 words when paramedics arrived, David Langford. Police opened a case. Detectives knew David's name, everyone did. He had ties to city officials, police chiefs, even judges. Every report against him mysteriously got lost in the system. Evidence vanished. Witnesses stopped cooperating after sudden visits from men in dark SUVs. Still, Emily refused to be silenced. Bruised but determined, she walked into the courthouse clutching every scrap of evidence she had managed to keep. Screenshots of texts, hospital records, photos of her injuries. She believed that once she stood before a judge, justice would finally be on her side. The hearing was scheduled in the old county courthouse, a place where the smell of wood polish lingered and the echo of footsteps carried down marble halls. Emily stood at the plaintiff's table, her hands shaking as she shuffled her papers. Across from her sat David, calm, smug, whispering to his lawyer. His golden cufflinks caught the light as though mocking her with every flash. Then the judge walked in. Judge Marcus Hall. Respected, feared, and notoriously unpredictable. He adjusted his glasses, scanned the room, and smirked when his eyes fell on Emily. She took a breath and began to speak. Her voice cracked, but her words were steady. She recounted the nights of stalking, the threats, the attack. She read out loud a text message. "If you ever try to leave, I'll make sure no one believes you." For a moment, the room was silent. You could hear the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights. And then, Judge Hall chuckled. A dry, condescending laugh that seemed to cut her down mid-sentence. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "men say things in anger. That doesn't make it a crime." The courtroom gasped. Emily froze. Her eyes filled with tears, but she forced herself to keep speaking. She begged, literally begged, for a restraining order. Judge Hall leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and smiled. Denied. But that wasn't the end. What no one expected was that an independent journalist, sitting quietly in the back row, had been following the case. She had dug into Judge Hall's past, combed through financial records, and uncovered something shocking. As Emily stood broken before the bench, the journalist slipped a brown envelope to the prosecutor. Inside, bank transfers. Dozens of them, all linked to offshore accounts, all leading back to Judge Hall, and one name repeated again and again in the transactions, David Langford. 4 months, Langford had been funneling money through shell companies, bribes disguised as consulting fees. And Judge Hall wasn't just aware of it. He was profiting from it. Suddenly, the laughter that had humiliated Emily just minutes before took on a new meaning. It wasn't the laugh of a man doubting her. It was the laugh of a man protecting his benefactor. When the truth surfaced, chaos erupted. Court officers scrambled, reporters swarmed, and Judge Hall tried desperately to adjourn the hearing. But it was too late. The story broke across national headlines. Corrupt judge exposed in bribery scandal, victim's case ignites outrage. Note that read, "It was never supposed to go this far. Don't trust anyone." The man who laughed in the face of justice had vanished. Rumors spread fast. Some believed Hall had fled to avoid prison. Others whispered he'd been silenced by the very network he once served. But Emily? She knew what it meant. Emily became a reluctant symbol of resilience, proof that even against power, persistence mattered. Yet her battle was far from over. Though Judge Hall was suspended, David Langford was still free, his lawyers maneuvering through loopholes. Witnesses were still terrified. And Emily, she lived each day looking over her shoulder, wondering when he would strike again. The last time Emily was seen in public, she was leaving the courthouse, clutching her files, the press cameras flashing in her face. Reporters shouted questions. "Do you feel safe? Do you believe justice will be served now?" She didn't answer. She simply looked into the lens of one camera, her eyes wide, not with relief, but with fear. Because even though the truth had finally been revealed, the fight for justice had only just begun. And as for Judge Hall, rumors began swirling of secret meetings, powerful friends, and threats aimed at anyone who dared to testify against him. The system had cracked open, revealing rot that went deeper than anyone imagined. The question now was chilling. If even the judges are corrupt, who will protect the victims? The courtroom scandal that shook a quiet town had finally cracked wide open. Judge Marcus Hall, once untouchable, was exposed as a man who laughed at victims while taking money from predators. But the truth, as explosive as it was, didn't end the nightmare. Because while the public celebrated the fall of a corrupt judge, the real danger was just beginning. Emily Carter, the victim whose courage revealed the rot in the justice system, had now become the #1 target of revenge. And those protecting David Langford weren't about to let her live to see real justice. News stations replayed the clip again and again, Judge Hall smirking as Emily begged for protection. The laugh echoed across every screen in America. Protesters flooded the courthouse steps, chanting, "Justice for Emily." Editorials demanded reform. Politicians gave speeches. And for a brief moment, Emily believed maybe, just maybe, the tide was turning. But behind the headlines and outrage, something darker was moving in silence. Within days of the exposure, Emily noticed it. A black SUV parked across from her apartment. Different plates each time, but always the same tinted windows. The late-night phone calls where no one spoke. Just heavy breathing, or the sound of muffled laughter before the line clicked dead. Then came the note, slipped under her door, scrawled in red ink. The judge was only the beginning. You're next. While Judge Hall faced suspension, David Langford was still free. His lawyers filed motions, exploiting every loophole, dragging out the process. And behind the scenes, Langford's grip on the town only tightened. Investigators later revealed how deep his network went. Police officers on his payroll, city officials silenced with envelopes of cash, and even clerks inside the courthouse feeding him information. Emily wasn't just fighting one man anymore. She was fighting an entire system built to protect him. But what Langford didn't know was that someone inside his circle was about to betray him. One night, an anonymous package arrived at the office of the independent journalist who had exposed Judge Hall. Inside was a flash drive. No note. No name. Just a recording. On it, a conversation between Judge Hall and David Langford, weeks before the scandal broke. Langford's voice was calm, almost casual. "You don't have to worry about her. She's weak. If she pushes too hard, I'll make sure she disappears. You'll get your cut same as always." Judge Hall's response? That same cruel laugh. This wasn't just bribery. This was conspiracy. Premeditated intimidation against a victim of assault. And it was enough to take the case to the federal level. The FBI moved quietly, launching an investigation into Langford's financial empire. Agents combed through bank accounts, interviewed witnesses under protection, and traced every offshore transaction. Emily was placed in a safe house. Armed guards outside her door. bars on the windows. But even then, she never slept peacefully. Every creak in the hallway felt like the sound of a lock turning. Every shadow cast across her blinds felt like a gun being raised. And she was right to be afraid. On a stormy night in March, just weeks before Langford's first federal hearing, someone tried to break into the safe house. Security cameras caught 3 masked men circling the property. One carried a crowbar. Another, a small canister of gasoline. They weren't there to scare her. They were there to silence her. The guards opened fire, sending the men fleeing into the night. 2 escaped. 1 was caught. And when his mask was pulled off, his identity stunned investigators. A deputy sheriff, a man sworn to protect the law, caught trying to kill the very victim the law was supposed to defend. The attempted assassination only strengthened the case. Under heavy protection, Emily testified before a federal grand jury. Her voice trembled as she recounted not only the abuse, but the threats, the laughter, the corruption that tried to bury her alive. She looked across the courtroom at Langford, who sat there smirking just as Judge Hall once did. But this time, when Emily finished, the silence wasn't broken by laughter. It was broken by the sound of the gavel striking wood. The trial would proceed. And then, just when it seemed justice was closing in, everything twisted again. One morning, Judge Hall, now under indictment himself, failed to appear at a scheduled deposition. His phone went dark. His house, empty. His car, abandoned at a rest stop miles away. Inside the glove box was a single piece of paper, a handwritten. If Judge Hall had disappeared, it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about secrets powerful enough to destroy more than one life. Late one night, as rain pounded the safe house windows, she received another anonymous message. Not a threat this time, but a warning. The judge is gone. You're not safe. They know where you are. Emily's story wasn't over. In fact, it was only entering its darkest chapter. Because just days later, surveillance footage surfaced, grainy, but unmistakable. Judge Hall, alive, stepping into a private jet with 2 unidentified men. And then, gone again. Where was he going? Who was protecting him? And how much longer could Emily survive, caught between a predator seeking revenge and a system drowning in corruption? The deeper investigators dug, the more chilling the truth became. This wasn't just one corrupt judge. This was a network, a machine. 4 weeks, Judge Marcus Hall had been a ghost, vanished without a trace, leaving behind only rumors, fear, and a town drowning in corruption. Emily Carter's life hung in the balance. David Langford still lurked in the shadows, his empire cracking but not yet broken. And the one man who held the darkest secrets of them all had boarded a private jet and disappeared. But sometimes, the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. And when it did, the fallout was unlike anything this town, or this country, had ever seen. Federal agents traced Judge Hall's flight to the Caribbean. Offshore accounts. Luxury villas. A trail of money so tangled, it looked like he had planned his escape for years. But what Hall didn't plan for was betrayal. One of his friends overseas tipped off the FBI in exchange for immunity. Within weeks, agents stormed a private estate on the island of St. Lucia. And there he was, Marcus Hall. The judge who once laughed at victims, dragged from a mansion in handcuffs, his designer shirt soaked in sweat. The image hit the news like wildfire. The powerful man who thought he was untouchable now staring down cameras with the look of a trapped animal. While Hall was flown back to the U.S., prosecutors turned their sights on David Langford. Witnesses finally came forward under federal protection. Bank records piled high. The anonymous flash drive containing recordings became the smoking gun. The courtroom was packed the day Emily took the stand again. She spoke with trembling courage, recounting everything Langford had done to her, the stalking, the threats, the night he left her bloodied on the pavement. This time, there was no laughter. No smirk from the bench. No dismissive tone. Only silence. And when the verdict came down, it was thunderous. Guilty. On all counts. Langford's empire crumbled overnight. Businesses seized. Assets frozen. The man who once prowled the streets in luxury cars was escorted away in shackles. For Emily, The journey wasn't just about winning a case. It was about surviving a system designed to crush her. There were nights she nearly gave up, days she couldn't breathe under the weight of fear. But in the end, her persistence tore down a wall of corruption that had stood for decades. She wasn't the same young woman who once stood trembling in front of a laughing judge. She was something more now, proof that even in the darkest corners of injustice, a single voice could spark a fire too loud to silence. Judge Hall's trial was short, brutal, and humiliating. Evidence of bribery, conspiracy, and obstruction left no room for mercy. But it was his final statement that sent chills down everyone's spine. Before sentencing, Hall leaned into the microphone, his voice hoarse. "You think this ends with me? You think one guilty verdict will fix what's broken? This system was built on deals in the dark, and it always will be. You may have silenced me, but the machine keeps running." The courtroom fell silent. His words weren't a defense. They were a warning. And yet, when the gavel struck, he was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. Emily Carter walked out of that courthouse one last time, not as a victim, but as a survivor. The autumn air was crisp. Protesters cheered her name. Reporters shouted questions. But she didn't stop. She didn't need to. For the first time in years, she smiled. Not because the world was suddenly safe, but because she had proven something to herself and to everyone watching. That even when corruption laughs in your face, truth can still roar back louder. And though Judge Hall's warning still lingers in the air, Emily's story has already lit a spark across the nation. Victims are speaking out. Officials are being held accountable. And maybe, just maybe, justice is finding its way back to the courtroom. This case reminds us all, corruption may run deep, but so does courage. Emily's fight wasn't just for herself. It was for every victim who ever felt silenced. But the question Judge Hall left us with still lingers. How many others are out there, laughing in the shadows? We'll uncover more cases, more stories, more truths that powerful people want to keep hidden. This is Dark Justice Files. If you've been moved by Emily's story, subscribe now. Hit that bell icon, because the fight for justice never ends, and the next story might just be darker than this one.